Casino is possibly the Scorseseest Scorsese to have ever Scorsese'd. And I don't really like this Martin Scorsese guy that much, so why the heck did I watch this movie in the first place? Well, my interest was piqued when I realized that it stars the Smothers brother. That's brother singular. It's just Dick Smothers. And as I looked into the movie more, as I looked into this cast, I thought, wow, it's a big cast on this one. Wow, it's 3 hours long. I started to be pulled in by some sort of allure. An allure I'll try to decode a little bit in this video, maybe. I'm not going to tell you that Casino, it's a bad movie. It definitely isn't. Maybe it's not exactly my kind of thing, but there are some pieces I really liked. There's some visceral, unyielding interpersonal moments, for instance. I like movies with a lot of talking in them, and there's a lot of talking in this movie. Well, there's a lot of talking in this movie. There are some nice little details in this movie, such as when Rothstein has to put on his pants before taking an appointment. There are also some things that I think fall short, like Joe Pesci's voiceover. It seems a bit goofy to me, especially in the beginning of the movie. I didn't find Robert De Niro very convincing as a Jewish character, although otherwise I guess he's pretty good. Did they really get the best out of Don Rickles here in a totally straight role? I guess his jokes wouldn't really have fit in, but something felt a little bit flat. Of course, the roles for women in this movie are terrible. I'll come back to that. It's a slightly mixed performance from Sharon Stone, probably. I think a lot of these aspects are actually better in the second half than the first. I like the second half a lot more. Anyway, there are some things that I liked, some things that I didn't like, that I feel somewhat clearly about. But mainly, I'm kind of uncertain about Casino, and I could kind of take it or leave it. My first impression of Casino was that it is the same. Of course, it's very similar to Goodfellas, which was also an adaptation of a book by Nicholas Pileggi. Fun fact, Pileggi was married to Nora Ephron. It's also similar to basically every other Martin Scorsese film I have ever seen. We've got the Italians and the Italian Americans, or really we have a movie that is fascinated by a non-mainstream culture that leverages a certain type of ethnic nostalgia that lavishes in the lingo and the cuisine. Maybe another word for all of this is stereotyping, but I think Scorsese tends to sidestep some of the more obvious ones. Again, we have a movie with a pop music soundtrack. Actually, I think it's kind of funny that this movie is set in the 1970s and 1980s, but Scorsese still mainly uses the music that he grew up with. We get a couple of brief glimpses of 1980s music, but then it's back to Gimme Shelter and such. Scorsese also uses the theme from Contempt extensively in this movie. That's composed by Georges Delerue. I have a video about Contempt, of course. This might be a little bit arbitrary, but I am not really a fan of directors using the score for another movie in their movie. Scorsese talks a lot about being a cinephile, but to me, this is sort of breaking the cinephile code, reusing a score from another movie. And if you're going to steal something, at least pick a movie that everybody won't have already seen in Film Studies 101. Anyway, we have a lot of the same actors in this movie playing a lot of the same characters. We even get another cameo by a violin-playing comedian. Perhaps the most significant part of this sameness, though, is that we have the familiar Scorsese subject of a man full of bravado, living large, doing what he wants, but ultimately flying too close to the sun. Well, does he face real consequences? That's debatable. So this movie, like I said, is in many ways kind of the same, but maybe it's been turned up a notch. It's longer, it's more violent, there's more voiceover, and if you're a fan of all that stuff, then maybe this is great news. My feeling is that maybe Casino is just slightly too much. It's been a while since I've seen Goodfellas, to be honest, but I think that movie is better. Okay, another common Scorseseism is the sense of insider information. When you watch a movie like Casino or Goodfellas, you feel cooler because you know how crime works, because you know about these underground societies. I think this is a pretty explicit dynamic. In both of these movies, the voiceover is explanatory. There are a bunch of other little tricks that have the same effect. For instance, in Casino, there's a scene where we see a group of mafia guys at a table together, and Joe Pesci's voiceover introduces each of them. I think we pause on each character, and Pesci says, this is Billy the Pigeon, Johnny Tightlips, Don Marion, Anthony D'Amico. In some ways, there is really no need for this information. You could film the same scene without introducing anybody. In most movies, that's probably what they would do. But stopping and giving us the names creates this in-group dynamic, right? The mafia is a society. It's about knowing people, I guess. And we get a taste of that experience here. If you saw one of these guys walking down the street, you might not think much of it, but if you know, you know. Now, beyond just knowing people's names, the movie also hones in on how power flows through these covert channels. You think society works one way? Well, actually, it's this other way. You think these are the things that matter? Well, actually, these other things really matter. Of course, it kind of goes without saying that this is partly a myth. This movie is based on a true story, and the mafia is real, but I suspect that myth is pretty deeply woven even into even the real life version of all this stuff. These characters that are larger than life, that are so intimidating, right? Intimidation, probably a big part of this. Larger than life, but they're also secret, right? Under living in the shadows, right? It's the stuff of legend, essentially. One thing that really struck me about this movie was how it ended. Personally, I think Scorsese is not that great at ending movies. Taxi Driver and After Hours have good endings, but every other movie I've seen directed by Martin Scorsese, I thought the ending was not that great. Casino, again, is a little bit anticlimactic. It closes in the present day with one of the main characters describing that nothing is like it used to be, that Las Vegas is forever changed. The old world is destroyed, torn down. The Tangiers casino has been demolished. There's no service anymore. There's no pride or something like that. Again, this scene sort of has no narrative purpose. You could just end the movie without this and it would be more or less the same, but it's an opportunity for Scorsese to gatekeep the audience one last time. There was the secret world. I pulled back the curtain for you, but you can never really participate. You can never really go there because it's locked in the past. I'm being a bit cynical here. Gatekeeping isn't really the right word, but it's another angle on this in-group thing, this privileged information. Even once you get a sneak peek of it, you can really never get there. You can really never be a part of it. This talk also alludes to one of the big themes in the movie, which is the oxymoron of criminal enterprise. The mafia are businessmen, but also criminals. In theory, they have some code that allows them to run a tight ship, that allows those things to coexist. But Casino shows that it's maybe not that simple. In the two main characters, Pesci and De Niro, we have conflicting instincts. One of them wants to be a criminal, and one of them wants to be a businessman. I'll let you guess which is which. Anyway, you know the old saying that there is no honor among is worth two in the bush. There is an interesting doubleness to Casino, where the movie itself mirrors some of its themes. For instance, I talk about this in-group versus out-group dynamic, how there is a kind of higher ground in knowing what's really going on, almost an intellectual higher ground, right? That sounds a bit like picking the winners in a football game, right? Sort of being cunning, knowing stuff, knowing what's what. That's sort of mirrored in the movie in some ways, where in the casino, knowing what's what, the people who run the casino and are part of the system are in stark contrast to the tourists just visiting and sort of losing all of their money, mainly out of ignorance. There are also these larger-than-life mafia guys in the movie, right? Well, okay, there are a bunch of larger-than-life actors in the movie, some really famous, but also some deeper cuts, some cultured selections, like the Smothers' brother. If you know, you know, right? Finally, we come to, I think, the inevitable Scorsese discussion about how this movie teeters between glamorizing and condemning its violent and regressive subject. You could say it's not indulging the male fantasy, it's showing how gruesome all this stuff is, or you might say that there is a doubleness, again, between the fascinating violence in the film and the real thing. So maybe it's a movie about this masculine allure of violence, and the fact that the audience might sort of enjoy it, might sort of come to see it, well, that's part of the point, right? Personally, I don't really buy either of these things. I don't think this movie is unconscionable, but I don't think there is any great sophistication in the violence and the cruelty of the film. I'm not that interested in what Scorsese is selling, and I think if he's teetering between glorifying and vilifying the male fantasy, he's probably more on the side of glorifying it. And one thing to keep in mind is that he has a pretty consistent approach across his filmography. I feel like I've said this exact same thing in other videos about movies he's made, but also in other videos about Hollywood films, because, to be honest, this is a pretty common affliction. Sharon Stone's character Ginger is one focal point for this. Maybe there is a message in everything she endures. there is a hint of subtlety here and there. For instance, Rothstein constantly says that all she cares about is money, but maybe the idea is just that he's projecting that onto her. Although, is that wandering into anti-Semitic territory? Maybe. There is kind of a moralistic undercurrent here. Don't marry someone who doesn't really love you, right? Don't try to find just the highest value partner, or the girl of your dreams might turn into a nightmare. Something like that. These are not particularly deep ideas, but there's maybe some kind of moralistic undercurrent, and there are heartfelt moments in this relationship. Sharon Stone has played plenty of characters with gumption over the years, and at first, Ginger seems like she might have some tough and smart core, but ultimately she ends up being a conniving addict. I guess it might seem out of place if there were a sympathetic character in this movie, but I think there are ways to tell a very similar story, but cast this character in a little bit different light. Having said all that, I did find her plot line moving. It's pretty visceral to watch her get destroyed, and this coupled with the passage of time, the fact that that version of Sharon Stone, the actress in real life, is locked in the past, is gone, it is kind of moving. There are some powerful interpersonal scenes in this film, even if the movie isn't particularly naturalistic. There's no denying that Casino is a fairly powerful movie. That's about all I have to say about it. As you can probably hear, I am sick at the moment, and I won't continue on because the odds of my voice giving out in the next few sentences are high. But like I said, I think at the end of the day, I could kind of take it or leave it. Not exactly my cup of tea, but I don't know. Not a bad movie.